How were you first approached about working as a costume designer for Mad Men?
Um, so Alan Taylor was the director of the pilot on Mad Men, and before I had talked about him because I had worked with him when he directed a movie called Palookaville, and um, and actually I think his wife Nikki Lederman, who's a makeup artist, I think that she was the makeup artist on Mad Men and on the pilot of Mad Men, and both Alan and Nikki had recommended me to Scott Hornbacher, who I also knew from my days in New York City. They had recommended me to Scott when they were gearing up to do the series here in Los Angeles.
Why do you think you were chosen?
Um, well, wait, I'm not finished with
Oh,
all
I'm
the
sorry.
story though.
Sorry about that.
So I was in New Orleans at the time, and I was the costume designer on a film that was starring Bruce Willis, and actually Bruce Willis decided to leave the movie, and then the director decided to leave the movie, and my agent had called and said, there's a new series that's coming to Los Angeles. It's called Mad Men, and they want Scott Hornbacher had called for you. Do you remember him from New York? And I said, yes, of course. And my agent said, well, they want to meet with you. And so I said, great, get me on a plane. I'll leave New Orleans. I'll come back to Los Angeles. I'll meet with the creator, Matt Weiner. And so I flew back to Los Angeles, and I was actually very late for my meeting because I arrived at Los Angeles Center Studios, and this place is like a maze, as you may know from experience in it today. And so I was, running around and trying to find the M building and to meet with, Matthew Weiner. And I run into the elevator, and I see this man in the elevator. He has on this really cute sports coat. It's like blue and plaid. I love it. He's holding a box. There's like a plant coming out over the box, a clock, different things in this box. And I say to this man, as I, do, I talk to people in elevators or wherever, and said, oh, I really love your blazer. And he was like, oh, thanks. He said, I really love your belt buckle. I said, oh, thank you. I had like my big J belt buckle on, gold J flashy belt buckle on at the time. And it was Matthew Weiner that I was speaking to in the elevator, who was also running late. And he said, oh, are you Janie? And I said, yes. Are you Matt? He said, yes. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm late. I've been running around like a crazy person. And he was like, oh, don't worry, everybody gets lost. So we sat down and talked for about 2 hours. And Scott was actually, I think he was in New York at the time, but was on the speakerphone. And we just had such a great meeting. We talked about, American history at that time, costume design. We talked about, all the different characters. He, went through my portfolio, and we talked about my portfolio and the different jobs that I had worked on. And we just had such a great creative connection. And, I remember him looking at his watch and saying to me, oh my God, we've been talking for 2 hours. I have to go write. And the next day they called, and Scott called my agent and asked me if I wanted to design the show.
What did you think when you read the first script? Did you have immediate ideas of what the characters should look like?
I did. A very important part of being the costume designer for the first season of Mad Men is that the show started in 1960, and Matt and I had a lot of discussions about how fashion really changes slowly, and people were really still wearing the design of the late 50s in the early 60s. So that was a huge part of the costume design of, especially of the first season.
When you were looking at designing for the characters, were you thinking of the episodes specifically, or the character arc for the first season, or had you and Matt talked about that?
Matt and I had talked about all the different characters and their storylines. I mean, I think he was, working out all those details as well, but, he shared with me as much information, that as much information that he had. And, he really, has lived with those characters for a long time. And that, those beginning conversations that I had with Matt were really just so valuable. And then that's when I really started my research process and the creative process of developing the different characters. So research for me is such a big part of that. So I started going through old photographs, watching old movies that Matt had wanted me to see, to get inspired from those films. And then also I did my research through looking at old catalogs, looking at old advertisements, looking at vintage newspapers, looking at vintage, fashion magazines. But really, that was not like the huge focus or the priority. It was really looking at how people really wore their clothing during that time and seeing what people really looked like in advertising agencies, secretaries and housewives, and really being inspired by real life of that time.
What's the collaborative process like working with Matt? Does he come in with notes about characters, or do you how much freedom do you have?
I mean, that's one of the things that I really love so much about being the costume designer of Mad Men. And also one of the things that I truly love about Matt Weiner is that he is so passionate about the show and about the period and about these characters that it's not so much about him being specific about what he wants to see. It's more that, like, it's a process of sharing creative ideas. So I always feel like we're really inspired by each other. So if he writes something about a character, it really inspires me. Or if I show him a costume or a photo of something that I'm thinking about a character, he has said to me, like, "Oh, I'm going to write a line about that dress that, Joan is going to wear." And so I always feel like it's such an amazing process of give and take, and that we are really inspired by each other.
So when you're working with Matt, how far in advance from this season do you know what's going to be happening ahead of other people? And
So in the beginning of each season, I will sit down with Matt and we will talk about the different characters, their storylines, and he'll tell me as much as he knows or as much as he wants to share with me at that time. And then I will also be given different. I'll also be given outlines for the different episodes before the scripts have been completed. I'll get outlines, and that gives me an idea of what characters are going to be in that particular episode, sort of where their story is going for that particular episode. And even if I don't have the script yet, I can start to begin my creative process and the breakdown of what characters are going to be in the episode, and start my creative process through with the costume design.
Matt's very protective of his scripts and them getting out ahead of time. How protective are you of the costumes that nobody sees it, and how do you keep that private?
Well, basically, it's like Fort Knox around here. I mean, we really have to be so careful, and all of us truly respect the fact that one of the amazing things about Mad Men is that it is so secretive, and we all feel so protective about not letting any of those stories get out because it's about protecting the story, and it's about protecting the show, and it's about not wanting to spoil it. And I think that Matt has really set that standard for all of us, and we all feel very protective and of that, and respect that so much.
When you're working with the cast about their characters, how much input do they have on what their character would be wearing?
Um, the the costume design is really about Matt and I working together, and the cast has always had really such great trust, and they love it. They love it pretty much
So,
everything. I mean, even if they do have a comment about a costume here or there, it really is. It's about my discussions with Matt.
in basic terms, describe a week in the process of designing costumes for Mad Men from the beginning to the end, like getting the script, breaking it down, designing, measuring, making the costumes, drawing, that kind of stuff.
Well, the costume design happens in a few different ways around here. So I will design and have a costume built for a particular character. We also do a lot of rentals with the costume houses. I also buy vintage pieces from different vendors. Things get sent to me all the time, or I'll go out in the world and hunt for them. And I also buy vintage and redesign vintage for the different characters. So the first step to that is getting the script and breaking down the script with all the different characters. Breaking down how many changes they're going to have, and then I will start my. But also reading the script, I just want to go back a second, because it's also about understanding the tone of the script. It's about understanding the themes of the script. It's about working with the production designer and the set decorator, knowing what colors and pieces they are going to be using within that set, or if we're going to shoot on location. I always am working with the art department, understanding like what they're doing as well. And it's also, for me, it's about, let's say there are a lot of characters, a lot of principal cast members within a scene. It's about being true to their character through the costume design and telling that story, but it's also about having all of those costumes being able to work together within that scene, within that set. So after I break down the script in that way and go see, work with the art department and understanding what they're doing, I will start my research process and getting inspiration from in different ways of like looking at the catalogs, going through the old photos, looking at newspapers, seeing maybe there's an old movie that I want to see, and just getting different ideas to have that connection, that visual connection of like, oh, that really speaks to me in the way that I want that character to look. So that's always a huge, huge part of it for me, as well as like going to the fabric stores and gathering my swatches if I'm building something from scratch. And
Will you sketch all the designs in advance, or just the ones that are being made for the show,
I'll sketch out the ones that are being made for the show. And then I'll go out into the world and look for the perfect fabric, and I'll do my swatching. I'll come back to the office, sit down at my desk again. Maybe I'll do another sketch, and if I have time, I mean, usually, a lot of times I'm doing a little sketch on a piece of paper.
So who physically makes the costumes?
I have a what's called a manufacturer, cutter, tailor, fitter, who is the person who will take my sketch and drape the design out of muslin on the dress form, and then once I approve that design on the form, that person will take that muslin and make it into a paper pattern, then cut the pattern out with the fabric, and then usually I'll have like an extra stitcher or seamstress come in and sew the garment and put it together, and then I will do my fittings with the actors with that completed garment and design.
So from the time you first get the script till the time the costumes have to be done, how much time do you get?
It really depends. When I'm starting the season, I get about 5 weeks of prep time. And that's the time that is like our big prep time. And I work with my crew, like my costume supervisor, my assistant costume designer, my key costumer, the set costumers. And that is the time in which I can communicate with them. Okay, this is, what we're doing for this character, this character, this character, this character, and I can be very specific about, what I'm thinking about in terms of my ideas of the costume, and also having, my creative conversations with Matt. I can be even more specific with my crew, and then that's the time that we go out into the world and, gather all the pieces from everything from head to toe, the hats, the dresses, the suits, the coats, the stockings, the undergarments, the accessories, the handbags, the gloves, the scarves. I mean, there are a lot of many pieces in each costume for each character.
Are there fabrics or designs that are ill-suited for television?
Yes, which I always have to be mindful of because I love plaid, but a lot of times, the fabrics that have the patterns very close together can give the effect, the moire effect, which means that the fabric is basically moving or vibrating.
So a larger plaid would be better then?
Always. A larger plaid is always better. But it could be anything from like a plaid to a houndstooth to a tweed that that could vibrate, or anything that's like polka dots sometimes vibrate too. You have to be mindful of like these different fabrics and how they're going to translate on film.
Are there any accommodations you have to make for issues like sound and lighting? Like a noisy bracelet or something like that?
Well, you know what is amazing to work with our sound guy, Peter? He really loves that, that the women, especially of, the Mad Men period, that they really did wear a lot of jewelry, and that, it is a natural thing for jewelry to make noise. And so his philosophy, which I totally love and appreciate, he's, my favorite sound man that I've ever worked with, that he has the philosophy, as long as we see it, it's okay if we hear it. And, I totally appreciate that philosophy and share that philosophy.
Along similar lines about the fabrics, are there any colors that work well or don't on television?
Yes, I have to be very mindful of using white, because the bright whites can, really blow out. And so what we do is we have a technique that we call teching, which means we will dye the garments that are white. Like there are a lot of white shirts in Mad Men, and that really is the uniform of part of the men's costumes in Mad Men. So we do what's called a warm tech 2, which is the perfect color of teching used on the whites in the show. And the dyes have actually been tested, and I've done many camera tests with the cinematographer Chris Manley, and we've all looked at the white that really does film the best, the white with the certain dye tech.
So is it like ends up being a cream, sort of?
It does. It is like a cream, and then that way, the whites are not totally blown out, and you can see the different textures and details of the fabric. Also, reds. I have to be mindful of reds. I mean, sometimes they are too bright, but it depends on what kind of statement that I'm trying to make.
During tapings of show, are you on the set, or?
I am on the set very rarely. I like to go to set every morning and work with my costumers that take care of the principal cast on set. And I like to go and make my tweaks and have everything the way I want it, the way, a brooch should be pinned, or the tie should be tied, or the pocket square is put in the pocket, or I always tell my costumers, make sure that the guys have their pants pulled up high enough. They should be at the navel for, certain characters. And, maybe there's a character who has to be wrinkled, or maybe there's a character who has to be dirty or bloodied, or, whatever is going on within that day. I mean, I always have to talk to the costumers about those specific details of how the costume has to be worn, how a scarf is placed, how I want, a character to wear their coat, or if I want them to wear their gloves, or if they're holding their gloves, or if they're going to be carrying their purse, how it's going to be carried. I mean, there are just a lot of, details within each day that have to be worked out, talked about. I try not to forget things sometimes. It happens. There's a lot of pieces to juggle, and thank God I have, an amazing crew that helps me.
What is your general philosophy for costuming the actors on the show when you're thinking about?
For me, I always want to be true to the character and that character's costume design. That's the most important thing. It really is. It's about telling the story of that character and being true to their story.
When you're presenting ideas to Matt, do you do drawings, swatches, the actual outfit pieces ever?
I do all of the above. Sometimes I'll show him a sketch with a swatch. Sometimes I'll show him maybe an inspiration photo and talk to him about the colors. I'll also, after I do each of my fittings, every costume is photographed on that actor, and I will also go show him the photos from that fitting. And then, sometimes we'll just have a discussion about what I'm thinking, what he's thinking. It's never a hard and fast rule. We, just have a lot of communication. But I do show him the photos, from the fitting, which is so helpful because that's really, the fitting time is when the actors really come to life. They have the costume on. He can see it, in that actor's body, and then we can really, have that detailed discussion about that character.
So next I want to talk about the characters on the show, how actors maybe influence the designs, and how the character's style has evolved through the history of the show. Let's start with John Hamm as Don Draper.
Well, John, or I should say, Don Draper to me was always a character of mystery, not only to the audience and people he knew within the show, but also to himself. And so that translated to me in terms of the costume design by him having his costume or his suit be a piece of armor, really. And so all those different grays really spoke to me. His very masculine tones were also very important to me. He's a character that is very minimal in design, and but it's also his costume design is also very masculine and simple and elegant in a way. I mean, I looked at a lot of Hitchcock movies in the beginning of getting my concepts together for Mad Men, and North by Northwest was one of my films that I always turn to look at the costume design of Cary Grant in that movie, and that was a film that was very relevant, especially in season 1, of like how Don Draper was going to look. I mean, it's not the color tones very different because Cary Grant in that film is wearing a lot of like blues, but it's also his costume design is very simple and elegant and masculine, and in that way I felt like it was relatable for Don Draper to have those same kind of qualities. But in the costume design, I wanted Don Draper to be, like I said, like very minimal. He's not an ostentatious character. It's almost like I always think of him as always like, I mean, it's in the story. He always has a secret. He always has a secret. So in a way, it's about hiding all of those secrets, and he does that through all his different suits.
And how has his style changed through the 60s?
Don Draper's costume design has actually changed very minimally. He's a character who really has stayed the same. His the silhouette has changed a little bit through the years. I mean, it's gotten a little bit skinnier as time has gone by. The lapels have gotten more narrow. The pants have gotten more narrow as years have passed. But sort of those principles of his character have remained, and so his costume design has remained true to that as well. This past season, season 5, we've definitely seen slight changes in Don Draper's costume design just because he, has this new relationship, new marriage with Megan, and, so there have been like a couple of opportunities for him to grow a little bit through the costume design.
Like the blazer?
Like the blazer, yes. I designed that for him specifically, and actually had gone to Matt and said, I'm thinking about this plaid blazer for Don Draper. Do you like it? And I was like, oh God, is he gonna like it? Because, it was like a big kind of a leap for Don to be so bright. But, Matt kept on talking to me about Dawn being happy and in season 5, and so that fabric really spoke to me, and he I showed him the swatch of the fabric and he loved it, and he was like, oh my God, I have the perfect scene for this sports coat. And he told me about the dinner party, and that he just loved that idea that Dawn would like wear a flashy sports coat to this dinner with the Campbells. And that Megan would go and say to him like, oh darling, you should wear the new sports coat.
So let's talk about Elizabeth Moss as Peggy Olson, which is a character whose style has changed a lot over the seasons.
It has. I mean, from season one, from her, getting pregnant and having to, disguise the pregnancy, was one challenge. Um, to make the audience believe that she was gaining weight instead of being pregnant was very challenging, and just the challenges of all the different phases of that, and also how that her being pregnant and overweight, and how her costume design would change with that weight gain happening. So she started out being very cute and youthful, and to really becoming more and more dowdy by the end of the season for when we see her having the baby. But the costume design was about her really hiding herself as that time progressed.
Okay.
And then to season two, she really is starting to come into her own. She's getting promotions, and to season four, where they go to the new agency, and her developing that way and having more money, and to season five, where it's really about her being a total worker bee. And I wanted her to play with those elements of the feminine and the masculine. So she wears a lot of, button-down shirts and skirts and rolled-up sleeves, and it's almost mimicking what the guys are doing in the office. Then we have this huge change for her in the end, where she has a new position and she leaves the agency, and it's like, she's like a butterfly. So I've really loved all the different changes through the costume design for her character.
Can you talk about January Jones, or Betty Draper's style as played by January Jones?
Yes, for me, Betty's costume design is all about the image of perfection. And it's also about, as Matt calls, opening up the package. So, you have the layer of the dress comes off, it's about the petticoats come off, it's about the girdles and the stockings, and, all these different layers of this character, of this woman, of this housewife. And for me, it's about peeling the onion, that I say. And that's about really unpeeling all the different levels of that character, which I think Betty Draper Francis is one of the most fascinating characters that I've ever thought about, worked with, seen. I always have such, compassion for her and her unhappiness and her prison that she's really created for herself by being an unhappy housewife of that time, and also being really imprisoned by the fact that she has not been able to fulfill any of her, or I should say, she has chosen not to fulfill any of her dreams. And so she is reliant upon her husband's financially, and also has, 3 children that maybe she thought she wanted, but is not happy.
Christina Hendricks plays Joan Harris. Can you talk about Joan's style?
Joan, I love Joan, and I love all of them actually, but Joan is that character who is a force within the office. She is sassy. She says what is on her mind, and is very upfront about that. And she also has a true understanding of her feminine attributes, and to me, that is expressed by her wearing, beautiful jewel tones, always very strong colors. The silhouette is very fitted. It's very hourglass. It's very like I said, she understands her feminine powers, and I think that she uses them.
John Slattery plays Roger Sterling. Tell us about Roger's style.
Well, Roger is very old money. He is New York City old money. He, of course, has every single suit that he wears made for him. And he also has, you know, definitely influences of the past in the way that, his style is very classic. It's double-breasted, it's three-piece, very old school, very old money in that way. But with that being said, he also has quite the personality and is quite flirty and flamboyant in a way. So I always loved the idea of him having brocade ties, and he has, all of his shirts monogrammed. Or if he wears French cuffs, there's always a bit of flair to or detail with his French cuffs. And, he has socks and garters. It's all very put together, but with that flair of the peacock.
Talk about Jessica Perez's Megan Draper character.
Well, I love Megan too, and that has been such an amazing experience to work with her and to be able to have that character within the show that really does represent the modern, the new, the young, the character that does represent what is going on within, the 60s. And as time has gone by, what's happening in the 60s with mini skirts and bell bottoms. And, Megan is sort of the foreshadowing of what's to come. So that's been really fun to work and play with the costume design for that character.
Just a short description of the following characters and how you would talk about their style. Kiernan Shipka as Sally Draper.
Sally Draper is that, I always saw her as that preppy kid, the preppy New York City, I should say suburbs of New York City kid. But she's changing too and growing up. So she's definitely, this past season, we've seen her very, very preppy, very classic within the home of the Francis home, but then having more of freedom within her home with Dawn and Megan, and actually mimicking Megan's costume design.
Robert Morris is Bertram Cooper.
Oh, he is old school all the way. The tweedy suits, the bow ties, argyle socks, and also he's the one character that I always saw him of not being in the uniformity of having the white shirt, but doing more playing with the tattersalls and the patterned shirts, because his character is a little more eccentric. So I really wanted to express those qualities of his character through the costume design that way.
Vincent Kartheiser as Pete Campbell.
When Mad Men first started, Pete Campbell was that character who represented professional youth. And so, Matt really loved the idea of him having those true period blue suits that were so great, during that time. But he's really developed in maturing through all the different seasons. So now his palette has changed to be more serious, darker, more mature. He's actually, really come into being more like Don Draper. And we've seen Don Draper for season 5 really have this role reversal. So it's been really interesting to play with those two characters too and their costume design.
Jared Harris as Lane Price.
For Lane, I always thought of him as having those influences of Britain, and having those influences of where he, has came from. And, so it was, for me, that was about him having a three-piece suit, but not a matching three-piece suit, but doing the suit separates and having crests on his ties, and him having a little bit more formality in his costume design.
Michael Gladys as Paul Kinsey.
Oh, Paul. He was definitely the sort of that beatnik character within The Office. And he really, we didn't really see that casualness in his character too often, but it was, about accenting the beatnikness of his character through like the little tie around his neck, or sometimes he would wear a mohair sweater, but it always had to be grounded in that, Ivy League preppy traditional uniform of the suit, but also playing with the ideas of using different accessories to be able to illustrate his more creative, I guess, almost like pretentious side.
Brian Batt as Salvatore Romano.
Sal is one of my favorite characters. I loved his costume design, and also being able to work with more flamboyant patterns and more flamboyant accessories, and taking that uniform of the suit and being able to mix the pieces and express a character in a different way by using brighter ties, accessories that really that were bigger, brighter, shinier, using those accents that way to express his character.
Aaron Staton as Ken Cosgrove.
Ken Cosgrove is the golden boy, and he is also another suit, but I loved the idea of, using gold in his ties, or having like a gold accent in his suit, and even though, he was also in a suit, and, the uniform, being able to play with the different elements of color for him.
Rich Summer as Harry Crane.
Well, Harry Crane has had different changes in his costume design too. He started with bow ties, and has gone to Mr. Hollywood. So he's had many changes from being strictly a suit to now. I've done a lot of blazers and trousers for him, just to express that Hollywood aspect of his character.
What was your most challenging design on the show?
Most challenging design. Oh my God, I think each episode is challenging. Okay, I have to think for a second. Probably one of the most challenging designs was for Betty Draper in season 2, where she and Dawn are going to meet the Barretts at this huge party scene. And it was written in the script that Betty's going to get sick in the car after she finds out that Dawn's been having an affair. And so I designed a gown for Betty, and we had to build 3 of them. Because we didn't know, where she was going to get sick, where it was going to land. And, it was just a very intricate design with a lot of details, and, just to make sure that each costume was identical to the next, and to be able to work within the time frame of having to get it done, was very challenging. Also, I think probably the most challenging moment, instead of it being just one specific costume, I always feel like the biggest challenges within Mad Men are having the principal cast, the day player cast, the background cast working all together, and having those huge scenes, and having everybody work together, being able to portray each and everybody's character and costume design and be able to have all of those people work in a scene together and work in the set together, and it all come together and work well.
What was your favorite episode to design for?
Favorite episode? Oh God, you know what? I loved season 5, episode 1. That was the party. So I was talking about the parties. Those are always the most challenging scenes, but always the most rewarding. And also, I just loved that idea of presenting Megan Draper in this mini dress, to open up the season. It was very exciting, and I mean, people loved it.
I'm sorry, go on.
Another one of my favorite episodes was season 1, the episode Shoot. Betty Draper had 14 costume changes alone. And it was, that was an amazing episode to play with that character, because she was in costumes from the, mid 1950s to 1960. And she was going through, she wanted to work again, and there were all these different scenes for her. And I think that episode turned out so great. I mean, I remember Matt coming to me and saying, and being so excited about, like, oh my God, Janie has, Matt coming to me and saying, Betty has so many changes during this episode. Janie, you're going to love it. And I remember thinking, like, oh my God, I know this is going to be huge. So, like in the beginning, it was that feeling of like, oh God, I know this is going to be a huge episode for Betty alone, not to mention like everybody else who is in the episode. But being able to see it on the screen and having that, on film, and being able to see that come to life it's really, so rewarding.
Did you have a least favorite episode to design for?
A least favorite? Nobody's ever asked me that. No, I don't think I have a least favorite. I don't know. I may have to come back to that one. I can't remember.
How has your work on the show influenced current fashion, do you think?
That has been one of the, what I like to call, amazing gifts of Mad Men. And it has really come full circle for me since I started my career as a fashion designer. And I always wanted to make a mark in fashion. And it has come in unexpected ways, but it has come. And we see the influences of Mad Men everywhere, not only in America, but all over the world. And it has not only been for one season, but it has been for all 5 seasons that Mad Men has been on the air. People have been influenced by the costume design for every season.
Were you surprised by that, or did you think it might happen?
I never thought. Well, let's see. Was I surprised? Yes, I've definitely been surprised by the effect, not only in American fashion, but by the effect on the world in fashion. But I'm very proud of that. I am surprised that it has really had such long-lasting effects, and that people really went so and have gone so crazy for the costume design. I mean, I just always felt like from the beginning I really loved all the different characters. So I didn't know that it would, have such an effect on the fashion world.
Why do you think Mad Men is a hit?
I think Mad Men is such a hit because people have that compassion for the characters' stories, and I think that it's amazing to see like what their development has been over the years. And also I think the way that Matt writes the show, there are always these amazing surprises. And whichever way you think the characters are going to go, they always turn and go a different direction. And, I love that about the show. I think that people love the costume design because, you know, that period is still relevant for today. And the silhouettes are relevant. People can really identify with the costume design. I think that people really love the elegance and just the sheer beauty of the period. I think that's why people really were so attracted to the costume design. Also, I think it's because we've been so casual in our dressing, and Mad Men is a way that people really get to see how beautiful and amazing it is to dress up and how you can feel when you dress up. So I think it's for all of those reasons.
What has being a part of Mad Men meant to you?
Oh gosh. I know this is like a sports show, like don't make me cry. It has been full of amazing surprises and gifts, and it's been so rewarding. I feel like all verklempt.
What advice do you have for aspiring costume designers?
I think one thing, don't gossip. That's a big rule. Be passionate about what you do, and be true to yourself, and focus on the things that you really want. I think it's really important, and understand those goals. Be very clear about what it is that you want, not what you don't want, and you can achieve it.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
10 years on a beach somewhere.
In vintage?
No, probably not. Where do I see myself in 10 years? I've been working on developing my own brand, and working on my own projects. So I really want to continue doing that. I have been working on developing my own TV show. We'll see where that goes. And I've been working on my own collections, and I'm in the process of developing my own collections and having them out next year. And I want to continue to grow my own brand. And
would this be through a company, or doing like through, in the past you did Banana Republic and QVC?
Exactly. This would be working with another company, and it being under my name, Janie Bryant. And I really see my brand as becoming a lifestyle brand. And, I've been able to work with Banana Republic. I've been able to work with Maidenform as their brand ambassador, and also designing the 90th anniversary collection. I've been working with Downey as their spokesperson, which has been really fun to, be able to talk about fabric and textiles. And then, as far as like my own brand is concerned, I really want to have my brand be a lifestyle brand. So it's beyond, being beyond apparel, and going into home and having that lifestyle brand. And I would like to continue to do costume design too, and see what happens.
So you're always looking at other people's styles. How would you describe the Janie Bryant style?
You mean in my design or my brand, or you mean in
for
my
yourself,
for
and
just
for
how
both
I
for
dress?
yourself and for where you'd like your brand to go?
Well, I always describe my own style as a little bit leather and lace. I like to have, the romantic mixed with the edge, and there's always a little bit of that, in how I dress every day. And then with my own brand, it is about being feminine. It is about having a great fit. There is always that luxury in my design and beauty, and also having influences of different decades. I always go back to, my designs with different period influencing me.
Great, thank you.
Am I done?
You are done, thank you.
Woo!